All right, here we are, the Gwadzilla Podcast. We have another phone interview, and it will be another interview with another author. This time we are interviewing John Blum, and excuse me, John Bloom. My bad.
No problem.
I could start over, but I won't, because that's one of the things you need to know, that this is a first draft, and the first draft is a final draft. And so we have John Bloom, and he's an author, and he has written a book called Rebels
Rebels
Without
without
a
a car.
Car. Yes. And so, John, why don't you introduce yourself? Just real quick, tell us a little bit about who you are. And I know that you're an author. Maybe you tell about some of the other books you've written, and just jump into this book about bike messengers.
That sounds great. I'm actually a professor at Shippensburg University in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, and I teach history. And my other books are historical books, mostly like in sports history. And people who have read what I've done before probably would have known me from books on sports at Native American boarding schools. The town I live in is Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and that's where the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was, which was one of the things that ended up becoming known for were its excellent football teams and sports teams. So
Yeah, Jim Thorpe
Jim
came out
Thorpe,
of there.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So
But
I've
there's a
written a
lot of
couple
but
of
there's
books
a
on
lot
that.
of horrific history, and so
Yeah,
life is nuanced, and there's some sad stories about the effort to whitewash the
yeah.
Indian out of the Native American, and but I guess your story is a somewhat a pro perspective, trying to say
N-
the good
Well,
things that
not
came out of this.
yeah, not really. I mean, it's more how the school functioned to try to promote itself through sports, which was not pretty. But also how the people who went to the school, who really had very little, light in their lives while they were there, this was one of the few avenues of joy that they could experience. So it's not so much a positive look, but it's at least, one that is maybe a little more empowering to the people that went there.
Yeah, I hope that's well received by both sides, and yeah, I
Yeah.
hope that anybody of native ancestry that encounters the book, yeah, reads it with the spirit that it's intended.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I did oral histories for that with people who had gone to not Carlisle, but other schools that Carlisle was part of a system, and that had gone to other ones like in Albuquerque or Phoenix or places like that, and they provide their input about what sports had meant to them and what it was like going to these schools, which, as you accurately pointed out, was pretty horrific.
Yeah, it's we want to say good intentions, but it's so awkward,
Right.
to start to say that it was with good intentions. But yes, you know, the American history has a clumsy past,
Yes.
and I think that we botched it on a few things, and
Yeah.
slavery, and then how we handled the slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation, and then
Yeah.
it's difficult. Basically, capitalism is capitalism, and yeah, if whatever, if the Americans of the 13 colonies hadn't pushed west, it would have been
Right.
it would have been it would have been the French or the British. But that doesn't make it right. Saying somebody else was going to
Right.
take your land and we took it, so
Right.
but
Right.
all right, like I said, I before the conversation I said that we could talk about all these things forever. And
Yeah,
so
we can
yeah,
go on.
yeah, so you're in Carlisle, PA, and you wrote that book, and you also wrote a book about Howard Cosell.
I did. Yeah, I wrote kind of a biography of him about both Cosell and his times. And you and I are old enough, we can remember that he was, an institution, really. I mean, nobody didn't know who Howard Cosell was. Even you didn't have to be a sports fan. He was a sports announcer, but
Yeah,
you didn't have to be a
of course,
sports
yeah.
fan.
In his era, he was so heavily like parodied
Yes.
because he was a caricature of himself, and
Yeah.
his relationship with Muhammad Ali was so wonderful.
Yes, that was, I mean, that was one of the things in researching I had forgotten about really when I started writing about that. And it was really an amazing relationship. His, kind of discussion of the protests during the 1968 Olympics. He was very supportive of the protesters, which surprised me quite a bit. So he's a very complex person, very prickly, very egotistical, as you know, we both remember. But he kind of wore that, you know, that was who he was. So really a fascinating television personality. It was a kind of interesting book to write.
Yeah, and well, that's two of your books, and you being a professor, so that gives you basically the street cred to just. We'll go ahead and we'll segue into this rebels without a car. Now, so the thing about messengers is the messenger industry involved delivery
Yes.
in all vehicles, and there was so why don't you tell me? You just take it from here. I haven't seen the book. I haven't held the book. I haven't read the book. So, what time period does it take over? And how did you go about writing this?
It was a really, you know, this was, of all my books to write, I have to tell you, Joel, this was the hardest one to write, because I didn't really have, you know, there've been other books written, fictional books, that you've talked to me before we went on about bike messengers. There have been sociological studies of bike messengers, one done by somebody I think who had worked in DC. But there never really been this kind of history of bike messengers. And as I say in the book, you know, DC has the best archives in the world, but there's not a lot in those archives about people like bike messengers, right? But they still had a huge impact on life in the district, and life in urban America. So I go all the way back to really the introduction of bicycles in Washington. Even beyond that, the introduction of pavement in Washington, which made bicycle riding possible for initially an elite group of white, you know, men. And then soon, you know, especially after the introduction of what's called a safety bicycle, which is basically the prototype for the bikes we ride today. That sort of democratized bicycle riding, became a lot less expensive. And then people started to use bicycles for delivery at that point. In the early years, bicycle messengers were typically children, who were child laborers. And they became kind of a cause for people who were trying to enforce child labor law. And DC was kind of an interesting case because, you know, it was not a state. It had a really weird government at the time, and you probably already knew this, but it was governed by a three-member panel of commissioners that were appointed by the President of the United States. So there was no local democratic input at all in the city, for the city government. So while other states, even some of the most conservative states that were out there, were passing child labor laws limiting when children could work, DC had almost none. So there were kids out there, you know, 11, 12, 13 years old, riding around in the streets, getting hit by cars, and, you know, delivering packages and messages for Western Union and for, you know, companies and all the things that bike messengers, you know, do. And they were probably a lot more integral to the economy at that time, interestingly enough, than they would have been when the very brief time I worked as a bike messenger in the 1980s. Because, you know, you literally had ADT, you know, which is a communications company, actually had call boxes in people's homes, and they would ring it, and that would send a messenger to their home, a bike messenger who would pick up a message for them and then send it to wherever they were going. So they were kind of integral and integrated into the whole.
So, what year would that be, and how rich? Like, would that only be like, you know, maybe a journalist or a politician? Like, who would have this ADT, call a messenger button?
They would have been like kind of upper middle class people. It would have been a lot more common than you might imagine. They were kind of like ring boxes in a home, sort of pre-telephone. And yeah, that really kind of, that's something. There's a historian named Greg Downey, and he has a book called Telegraph Messenger Boys, and he writes about that. So yeah, so really we're very much a part of the whole vibe of the city. And of course, you know, DC relied on documents more than a lot of other cities did. That was sort of its bread and butter. So like when crusaders that were trying to end child labor were looking at, let's say, Louisiana, they were focusing on kids shucking oysters in the harbor, right, with sharp knives at the age of 6. And they were looking at Texas, they were looking at, textile mills where there are little girls in, textile mills breathing and getting brown lung disease. Or they're looking at northeastern Pennsylvania. They were focusing on the breaker boys who were pulling slate out of anthracite coal that was coming down coal chutes. But in DC, they focus on bike messengers. So that's kind of interesting that was actually the group that they saw as exploited. The interesting thing about that, though, too, is what they focused on mostly. It was a very dangerous job, and especially got dangerous as we get into the teens and cars are introduced into the city. And obviously, once you get cars introduced, that's, throwing in the same hazards that people are facing today on bicycles in the city. And but what they focused on more than that was the fact that a lot of these kids were working in red light districts. They were delivering drugs. They were delivering, messages back and forth to sex workers, and that was what they kind of honed in on. And they thought that would really capture the public imagination a little bit more. But what is kind of one area where you do have a lot of sources for that is congressional testimony, because the district's budget was determined so much by Congress. They would go before Congress when they were, it was called the National Council of Child Labor, National Child Labor Council, and they would go before Congress and say, this needs to end, and then they would use these sorts of examples to explain why child labor needed to be regulated more in the district.
And some of those might have been show and tell hyperbolic, like not the norm, but did happen.
Right. And it's kind of interesting too, because it was this kind of protection of childhood innocence thing that was going on. And there's a really famous photographer that used to take pictures of all these works. So, in those examples I gave of like the little girl in the textile factory, you've probably seen that picture at some point. It's a really famous picture, and it was Louis Hine who took these pictures of the child laborers. And he took all these pictures of the children that were working in red light districts in Washington. And then he would quote them underneath and say, they sometimes have me working late at night in bars, but not too often, or something like that. And so he really played that up, just like you said. I mean, really tried to exaggerate that. But what's kind of interesting is all the children that he took pictures of and that were publicized were white. But that did not represent the entirety of who was delivering packages on bicycles in Washington. In fact, I had a graduate assistant of mine go through and look at want ads in the Washington Post for bicycle messengers from about the mid 1890s to I think about 1910. And I think in terms of the want ads, it was probably I would say 40% African Americans they're specifically asking for, that as they would put it, we want a colored messenger. Why, I don't know. And there are other indications if you go, look at other census records and other kinds of records. The population of African American bike messengers was not that high, but it was substantial. So it's kind of interesting. He chose to only show white messengers, and one of the things I write about in here is that he wanted to project a sense of innocence, and at the time the idea that child innocence would be afforded to somebody who wasn't white would have been seen as ludicrous to people. They would have said that's really something that is reserved, that's a concept reserved for white children.
And the early 1900s, I mean, you're only a few decades from the Civil War, so
yes,
it's not like your advocacy of workers' rights. The advocacy is for Black people. I mean, it was just a minute ago where the people were viewed as tools and
Yeah,
property.
and it's right in the middle of Jim Crow America. It's post Plessy. It's post, the repeal of the Civil Rights Act in 1883 by the Supreme Court. So we're right in the middle of Jim Crow. Um, and strangely, DC, there have been some historians that have written that it was an extremely segregated city. It was extremely discriminatory city, but also had a street culture that was a little bit more vibrant and open for African Americans than you would maybe expect. But nevertheless, it's really something that the white children were the ones that Hine focused on. But what
I
I
mean,
don't really,
it's really no different. A couple blonde cheerleaders in a car accident,
yes,
it makes more headlines than any other group of kids.
this is an early example of that. Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm doing an oral history project on bicycle messengers, and we just skipped over something, and it may not be that much of a defining feature of who you are, but it's part of who you are. So you worked as a bike messenger. When was that,
Really
and for how
briefly.
long? Well, no, but
Okay, so I'm glad you said worked as a bike messenger. Because I always say to people, with the people I interviewed, you mentioned before we talked, Andy Zalen and others, I always said, I'm not a bike messenger. I worked as a bike messenger, and it was for 2.5 months. And I could go into all sorts of stories about
yeah,
how
why,
that
why don't
happened.
you real quick? How old are you? How did you come about it? And do you remember what company you worked for?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, I worked for IGE. I don't know if you ever heard of that company.
Of course.
Um, it was on 14th Street, I think like 1800 something 14th Street, like near 14th and R. Um, and It was kind of a small company, and like the really good companies at that time, I think,
What year
like
was this?
this was in 1985.
Okay.
It was April of 1985 is when I got hired, and I made it until the middle of June. And where I went to college, I went to college at UC Davis, and it's a very bicycle centered college. And at the end of the year, throughout the year, if you parked your bike illegally, the police would impound it. And at the end of the year, if you didn't claim it, they would auction bikes off. And so I bought this bike at the bike auction for $5. I tell people it wasn't worth that.
Oh.
And it was a 5-speed. It was kind of a cool bike in a way. I could get into that a little bit, but it had a banana bar, not banana seat, but a banana bar. And it had been a 5-speed, but the gears didn't work anymore. So my roommate in Davis had reconfigured it so it was just one gear. It was always in fifth. Bad idea when you're going up and down hills in Washington, because the chain would snap all the time. So do you remember there used to be a bike shop right off of DuPont Circle? I think it was like on Q. It might have been
So
P or
there
Q.
was a hardware store bike shop combo at
Yeah,
on P Street, right there at 20th and P.
like in a little kind of wedge in this. Is that where you're talking about?
It would be on the right hand side, and on the left hand side would have been on the other side. Would have been second story books.
Yeah, I think that's where. Yeah, I think that was it. And so I would bring my bike in there, and the guy kept telling me I had a classic bike. And at first, he would charge me very little, and then the chain would break, the brake cables would snap, all these things would happen, and he just said to me, "I'm not letting you get rid of this bike." And at one point, he had like $100 10-speed that was out in front, and I said, "Look, I'm just throwing this in, and I'm using that bike because you're as a bike messenger, you're riding 30 miles a day, and this thing was not handling it." And he was like, "No, I'm not letting you do that. That's a piece of crap. You have a classic bike, so I'll fix it for free." So he kept working on this bike, and I got to be kind of like got into the habits of a bike messenger in the way that I rode. And you know how you obviously know you ride on the double yellow line when there's traffic, and I was going down 14th Street into Pennsylvania Avenue. Um, and I made it down to the bottom. I made a right. My delivery was to the Treasury Department, and my brake cable snapped. So I was fine, but I just thought that could have happened about 30 seconds ago, and I would be going into full speed into traffic on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I just walked it over to a payphone and called it in. And that was the end. That was in the middle of June of 1985. Interestingly, by the way, I was subletting a room in a group house at the time, and for $90 a month. And the guy who lived in that room, he would work as a bike messenger and then travel for part of the year. And so I was subletting it from him while
Do
he
you
was traveling.
do you remember
And
their name?
I don't remember his name, but I was going to tell you where we lived, and maybe you might remember him. So it was in a house that was called Longfellow Community on 16th and Longfellow. There's now a Mormon, or they tore it down and built a Mormon church there. But anyway, yeah, I don't remember his name though.
Yeah, so it's it's an interesting nomadic culture. And when you were talking earlier about like young people, it's interesting. A lot of people work the job because, it was in your era, it was a pre-digital era. And so you could fudge the social security number thing.
Yes.
And most people were 1099, so they didn't really care that much. But so
Yeah.
internationally, European people, Central American people would come, and those weren't the greatest number of the population, but it was an international job, as DC is an international city. And
Yeah.
I think that being under the radar was good for that. I interviewed a guy who grew up in the area, and he became a messenger because there was a warrant for his address and he had to be off the books.
Sure.
And so yeah, it's an interesting group of people that certain people are drawn to it. But so okay, so you went from the early 1900s and you researched and you're telling us about child labor. And so
Yeah.
like maybe you can tell us like do you know about peaks and valleys, about the growth, like the number of messengers on bicycle in that era, maybe a pre-war, post-war decline, or
Yeah, I wasn't able to really get firm numbers on bike messaging. I do have numbers in the book that come from different sources, but it was really hard to figure that out. But there's a clear decline when you get through the 1920s, is, the district becomes increasingly oriented around the bicycle. Although there are still messengers working for Western Union in the 1930s. And in fact, a couple testified before Congress, a couple of kids, trying to get rid of the independent contractor system, which is kind of interesting. But it really does decline. You do have a really vibrant bike culture in DC, like racing and that kind of thing. But really, what is the impetus to the second sort of wave of bike messengers, that starts in the early 1970s, around 1972, 1973. You start to see articles in the newspaper about who are these people we're seeing all over the city, and that really follows the bicycle boom, the second bicycle boom, which starts in the middle of the 1960s, and so the rise of in this case now young adult messengers sort of begins at around that time period. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Bicycle technology really improves quite a bit. They become more lightweight, more speeds to the bicycles, which I know that changes with track bikes and everything, but that was kind of seen as a real advancement in the late 60s, early 1970s. You actually had the first bike lanes put in on the streets in 1969.
where was that?
That would have been along East Capitol, and there was a city councilwoman named Polly Shackleton. I don't know if you ever heard of her before, but she was really pushing for that.
I've heard
And
of Ernest Shackleton.
okay,
Do you know
yeah, I
yeah.
don't know if they were related. That's I actually thought about that, if they were related, but
I worked as a messenger. I remember it was very harsh winter one time, and I Street was a sheet of ice, and I think that delivery on I Street would have only been
was
able to
like
be done. You would have to be Ernest Shackleton to make that happen.
you probably felt like that. Yeah, no, absolutely. So anyway, yeah, so she was part of that, and there's the organization WABA was formed at the time, Washington Area Bicyclists Association, and and they were really into promoting bicycles for commuting and that kind of thing, recreation and commuting. And I think they were able to get some of the paths put in Rock Creek Park, and that those sorts of civic improvements. But that is really when you start to see bike messengers emerge again. So really in the early 1970s.
And then let's say in the early 70s, can you give us like every 5 years a rough estimate of the number of bicycle messengers in Washington, D.C.?
What I think, I don't know in terms of those years. I know by about the middle of the 1980s, there was about 800 there is estimated working in Washington, D.C. And then when we got to the time I was coming back and doing my first oral histories in like 2012, 2013, 2014, we were already down to, I think, maybe 200, something like that at the most.
So, in your oral histories, who are some of the people you interviewed? Who will be featured in your book?
Probably the one I sadly really, I mean, it's a sad story, but Bega, I was able to interview. I can read the list of them
Yeah,
here.
why don't you do that? And so that's Sean Bega Blumenfeld. And yeah,
Yeah,
he was a fixture not just as a messenger, but in the DC cycling community as a whole. He was a founder of a race team. I always called it a women's race team. They had men who raced it on hub racing as well, but they had so many dynamic racers, several of which were ex-bike messengers. Sheba Farron may have been one of their top racers.
right.
One of Sean Bega's. I mean, they were like brother and sister. They're like the tightest of friends, and yeah, I mean, she still feels that loss, but
Yeah,
yeah, he was the captain and coach of that team, and I'm on a mountain bike team, and he worked at City Bikes, which sponsored our team, and when we hosted a cyclocross race for several years, he was the MC of that event. But not to go into Bega, I just wanted to give a little shout out to
yeah,
Bega because that name is somebody who should be immortalized. So
yes.
let's hear the list.
Sean Fenty, Eric Gilliland, Javier Griffiths, David Eisler, as you mentioned, James Kearns, who helped put on the DC um, the Cycle Messenger World Championships with Andy, Kim Reynolds, Sean Smith, and Andy Zalen.
Okay,
Um,
so I know many of these people, some better than others, and yeah, and everybody in that list, I can see where there's a great story of past, present, and future. And so, like you when you mentioned Kim Reynolds and Sean Smith, I'm assuming so both these guys were fixed gear track bike riders, messengers for the long haul for 4 seasons. But there was a point when there was a Washington D.C. and Paris somewhere at the same time. They started bike share companies, and Sean Smith and Kim Reynolds migrated from bike messengers to be key players in the formation of Capital Bike Share here in Washington, D.C.
that's how I got to know them.
Exactly. And then
Because
Eric
yeah,
Gilliland was, you had mentioned WABA. There was a moment where Eric Gilliland, he had retired from being a bike messenger, and he may have stuffed envelopes and volunteered at WABA, but he became the executive director of WABA, and then he later became the executive director of Capital Bike Share.
that's right. And when I interviewed him, that's when he was executive director of Capital Bike Share. And then he put me in touch. So Javier Griffith worked at Capital Bike Share. David did. Um, Kim, as he said. Sean, I did an interview while he was in the repair shop. He was great. He was great. As in the middle of doing repairs, he's fixing bikes. So no, yeah, I can't really take time off from this, but I'll talk to you right here. So
Yeah, so I
that
mean
was really,
that's a dynamic list, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
It was.
and the list of Capital Bike Share former messengers goes on. There's still, even today, a good number of ex-messengers. Rod Smith, he was a bike messenger for probably 30 years, and he's Capital Bike Share probably for 15 years. But he's a very interesting guy, but I don't think he has much to say.
Okay. Well, I have to say I'm amazed just having done it, for a very short amount of time. Um, I'm amazed you guys could do it for 30 years and
Well,
more. I mean,
I
how long
mean,
did you do it for?
so I was a dabbler. I was a college courier. So I don't normally come into the conversation that I am more interested that I am like a cyclist and I am a documentarian. So I took photos of bike messengers for 20 years and I kept a blog I'm messenger adjacent. I do alley cats. I hosted alley cats, but it's not really about like, because the messengers are so possessive. I did it on and off for years and I worked as a motorcycle messenger, but I wasn't really, you know, I mean, I know David Eisler from there. We were probably 18 or 19 when we met, you know,
Sure.
so yeah, but there's gatekeepers. And so I usually don't like to even get into that conversation,
Yeah,
you know.
I feel that, I have to say, I feel outside the gates on a number of levels. I know people like from DC, very proud of being DC natives. And so I don't want to pretend I'm, a DC native at all. I definitely was somebody who moved into DC and moved out. And, I live in Pennsylvania and drive down into the city and definitely an outsider. So,
Yeah,
um,
and so yeah,
so
but to keep going down the list, so you interviewed Sean Fenty, the son
yeah,
of the owners of a running store in Adams Morgan. I saw them the other day, and just as everyone they get older, but their father was a cyclist and a ultra endurance runner and ran in the deserts. And Sean's brother Adrian Fenty, both those guys were
became the
road
mayor.
cyclists. Yeah, he was the mayor, and he was mayor of Washington D.C. in a time where we talk about Capital Bike Share and you know, there was, I guess, it was the head of the Department of Transportation, Gabe Klein, and so yeah, Adrian Fenty, I feel like, he happened to be the right guy at the right time.
Yeah,
He was young, he was active, he was concerned about things that people who are young and family oriented would be, like schools got renovations or playgrounds got renovations. There was a lot of stuff happening, bike lanes, and yeah, he was a
yeah,
cyclist, and yeah, I was, he. I'd see him speak at, our bike to work days and whatnot. And yeah, so that's a great list of people, but really, I think there's room for you to interview. I mean, the thing with the oral history is, and that's what I'm trying to work on here myself, is I think there's some amazing people with amazing stories, and we need to get
yes,
we need to get the stories from them before they're gone.
yeah, absolutely. I'm really impressed you're doing an oral history project on DC bike messengers because I think it's going to be fantastic. And are you working to store it anywhere where people can go and?
So right now it's just on YouTube.
Okay,
And so people can watch this Gwadzilla podcast. I received a grant from Humanities DC to do 10 episodes, but I'm up to 30.
wow,
And
wow, that's great.
but it's really a rough take, But
Yeah,
like we mentioned these names, I'm friends with Andy Zale and I see him on the regular, but I'd love to nail him down and I run into him and I just need to just hit record. Cuz
yeah,
every time we talk, he delivers he just drops these gems. And it could be anything, we could be talking about bicycle messengers. And so, we talk about, you know, Sean Fenty, like there's some bike messengers were into the bikes and loved bikes and raced. And, there were a number of people. And just today, I heard an announcement that Burrito Brothers, a long time small local chain or
yeah,
whatever, closed its last shop, but they used to sponsor a cycling team. And that cycling team, I don't know who else was on it, but multiple fast bike messenger racers, Jay Moglia, Chris Schmidt, Tom Kendrick. I don't want to leave anybody out. Oh yeah, of course, Zach Chariot Brown. And so those are just a few racing bike messengers. But recently, with the photos I've taken, and I took thousands of photos, I've been posting every day. I post 10 or 12 like non photos. It's just a photo of a dude going by on the bike.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I've got 4 or 5 people that will chime in. And there was this guy, Lawrence Colbert, who I took photos of for 20 years. He was a bike messenger. He was out there no matter the weather, and he was doing it. He wasn't a hipster. He was a guy with a job. You,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and I don't even know if he knows what an alley cat is, but he was out there, he was doing it. I took his photos, and he sees these photos, and even he's like, oh my God, he's like, he's now realizing how many guys were out there, but how many people who he knew but didn't know, and maybe never even spoke to, but saw for maybe 10 years or 15 years. My documentation goes like 2004 to 2020. So I really caught the tail end of it, but a lot of those people had already been out there for decades.
yeah, yeah. That's great. I think one of the things that really attracted me to this topic was something that you say in the documentary Courier Culture, which is, I don't know if people have ever had a chance to see that, but it's on Vimeo, and it was done. Were you part of the production team that made that, or
Oh, not at all. It was just kind of weird, so I knew them from around town. And I knew Colby because we used to race each other in mountain bikes, and he was younger and faster. And, now he's older and faster. And so
right?
I knew him through cycling. So it was almost just like it's funny. They used more of me than even they expected,
Uh-huh.
because they interviewed me, and then I was like, oh, like I think I could have said more, and then they interviewed me again, and then they were able to splice together basically me talking throughout the whole thing. So
Well, you just really, I mean, some of the things you said in just a very like short clip just really summarized the whole reason why I am attracted to this topic, which is that it is a community of people that sort of, see an alternative lifestyle, and we're, out to try to live a life that was a little bit freer from, acquiring a house in the suburbs, or, getting on the rat race of one kind or another, which is really not Washington. I mean, most people come to Washington for the opposite reason, right? You want to get involved in government, you want to get ahead, you want to, make a name for yourself. And that was especially the case in the 1980s when I was doing it. So it was really kind of interesting to see that kind of community emerge. Um, a counterculture at the time when people are kind of saying countercultures are dead. And they were existing among these bike messengers. So I found that to just really be really interesting.
yeah, I would say that the bike messenger eras, and I can't speak for those that I didn't witness, but it was very much like a Kerouac beat time.
Yeah,
There was a bohemianness, there was a community, there was the group house living. There was a lot of hand to mouth living, but then you had spoken. There were also people who it was a job where people could travel and come back and work. So there were musicians that would tour and then they'd come
yeah,
back and work as a messenger, or there were skateboarders who would go on the national, Tony Hawk level skateboarders, and they would go to these competitions around the nation, and they'd come back and work as a messenger, and the list goes on. And some people just want to sleep late. I mean, there's addiction, there's drug abuse, there's drug use on the
sure.
job, there's mental illness, and there's a lot of people who just did it for a minute. I mean, in those times, the 80s and 90s, it was a job that you could just show up and do that day, and you can decide that it's not for me.
Yeah,
You,
no. In fact, when I did it, I remember I was doing it 5 days a week at first, and then I realized I can't do it 5 days a week, and so I did it 3 days a week. And it was like I'm an independent contractor. That's I can decide when I'm working and when I'm not working. I mean, they can decide if they want to give me a delivery too. So that was part of the deal. But that was an appeal to it. Now that's also a way that messengers get exploited too. And that was something that Vega talked to me quite a bit about, how he, said, actually, you can get your Social Security and health benefits and, those sorts of things if we became regular employees and weren't contract workers. But as he put it, he said, isn't it worth it to do that and come to work on Tuesdays? And he said, and some people said it was, and some people said, I'd rather just not come to work on Tuesdays. So, it was kind of like that's what gave bike messengers freedom, and it also might have curtailed their freedom in a certain way too.
Yeah, we've mentioned the name Andy Zale and Sheba Farron, and just as Sheba was Bega's sister, Andy was Bega's brother. And
Yeah.
and I don't know the history, and it's not my history to tell, but I do know that there was something called the DC Bike Messenger Association. And
Yes.
I remember Scrooge, who's an epic character, and I think he has been interviewed for projects, and I think he even hosted his own collection of stories for an oral history project, but I don't really know him that well. I mean, we've spoken and we're respectful, but I don't claim to know him. He's a wild dude,
Right.
and but so
I
the
couldn't track him down. I mean, I probably, if he's listening to this, would say, "Oh, I would have been there," but
I
I
don't
had the
think he
hardest
no no well,
time.
he's not going to listen to this because because why would he listen to the story that I'm going to tell?
Right.
He saw it up close and personal. He doesn't care
Yeah.
about my perspective. You know, I mean that's my take. That's my take. I would
I mean,
love to.
it's like when I was searching for people to interview, and I forgot who I called, but I was saying, who should I talk to? And that was like the first name, like three or four people brought up. But you know, he was on Facebook, and I would message him and whatever, but nothing came of it.
So
So
when I started my photo project, I approached him, and so like people don't understand that taking photos on the street is not an easy task. I'm 6'4",
no,
6'4", 230 pounds. So it's not like I'm afraid that people are going to beat me up, but it's people don't necessarily want it,
yeah,
and so it was an interesting process of earning the approval. And I never went in and was like, I used to be a bike messenger, because no, that has nothing to do with anything.
yeah,
I like taking photos of people on bikes. I want to take photos of you on your bike. I think bike messengers are interesting. And then like whatever, and then there's the age discrepancy, but there's this one guy, Chris Soda, rest in peace, Chris, and he'd be like, paparazzi. I got like 17 photos of him flipping me off. But this guy was an epic road cyclist looking to become like a fast racer, and he'd come back from some of these rides, and if I was like, I lived in Mount Pleasant, and a lot of people returned into the city coming up Park Road past my house, and if he saw me, he'd stop and get a glass of water and hang out with me and my kids. I mean,
right,
it's like it was an interesting thing, and so for me, I love the way the camera gave me a chance to have a chance to interact with the people and
yeah,
get a piece of their story, and that's real. I still want to do that, and I just have to make it happen, because there are so many interesting people with interesting stories. And Scrooge, I mean, he's an adult man, and he's still a cool dude, but like,
right,
I mean, when he was a young man, he was a cool dude.
yeah,
Like he's strikingly handsome. Like,
yeah,
but he has a presence to him. I mean, but he was also like, he was a bit of a patriarch to the scene, but the scene was too big for that. And every year there's a freshman class, and the freshmen may not care about like the prom king from 5 years ago.
sure, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and
That's
so,
really interesting. Thinking it, yeah. And I didn't get into these sort of intricacies, so it's really interesting hearing this from you.
well, so I don't know.
Now
I
I'm
no,
thinking, I
I
wish
wasn't
I'd
there.
written another chapter.
No, and yeah, you can still write another. You can. It's a
Right.
next edition, but no, and that's but so I don't know. Like like I mean, there's a passing of the torch. Like,
Sure.
what is the overlap? Like, one time there was this guy, Danny Kowalski, Danny K, and he was retired from being a bike messenger, and you know he he's a DC fireman now, and I definitely need to get with this guy, because he was a messenger at a very young age, and he did it in multiple cities. He was in Washington D.C., Richmond, and New York, and
Yeah.
he dabbled in bike racing, more cyclocross and then road, but whatever.
Yeah,
he's just an interesting guy. And one time I told him that I said, did you ever think that you would be the king? Because he was hosting Alley Cats, he was winning Alley Cats, he owned his own business, and respect. He was the man, although he's a humble, whatever. And he was like, no, I'm not the king. I was like, there are many kings. It's not like it's not just it's a fragmented nation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's no time clock and there's no democracy. And yeah, and just because, Andy doesn't need to give up his crown, he's still the king. Scrooge doesn't need to give up his crown, he's still the king.
Right.
Danny's retired. Like all those guys, props to them. They're all legends. And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's an interesting work culture. And
And
it's funny because
and
in college I actually wrote a sociology paper. I did an independent study where I wrote a paper about the bike messenger and as an ethnography.
yeah, yeah. That's great. I mean, I know that there have been a few that have been done, and
Well, I
it's
think I
really,
got
I mean,
I think I got a D on it.
it's I probably would have given it a better grade than that. I'm betting that I
I think
would have.
anybody would. I think anybody would.
Yeah.
It was too much to break down.
You
It was.
know, the other thing too that I just, and I addressed this in the book, is bike messengers were really kind of disparaged in the public press quite a bit, because they rode on sidewalks and, dressed in an uncouth manner, going into fancy office buildings and,
Yeah, so it would have been
you
your
know,
era. Did you? And I thought about it just today. I was like, I wonder if Bob Levy is still alive.
I wonder if he is too. Now it's well, oh, I don't want to say too much here, but yeah, Bob Levy obviously is a big part of this book.
There you go.
And
Well, then exactly. So I'm touching on points, and the thing that makes my talking points is I'm really nobody, and you are someone who's an author and did research, and your topics I think are relevant.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So like Levy, when I started writing in April of 1985, that was only, I think, like 2 or 3 months after his first um, kind of disparaging column about bike messengers, which was, I think, it was right before the elections in 1984, and it was he was in the National Press Building, and a bike messenger came in and wrote, took out a Sharpie and wrote "Impeach Reagan" on the wall of the um, uh, elevator, and nobody did anything about it. And he was just outraged by that somebody would, commit vandalism, and nobody, the messenger didn't care, the dispatcher didn't care, nobody cared. So that's what launched everything. But he really, like, he got to be kind of insane about it. I mean, I think I forgot, I counted every column that he wrote. And I think it was like 19 columns over 15 years or something, about bike messengers, and all of them, getting beyond disparaging, almost dehumanizing, in a way, and painting the caricature of bike messengers that I felt kind of endangered people, and made people feel kind of like these are just menaces to the city that, if they ever got hit by, a car, who cares, right? And it was the case that bike messengers got hit by cars,
no,
sometimes they got killed.
in the Washington Post magazine, I remember on one of the last pages there was an article with an illustration, and I don't know if it was Bob Levy, but the illustration was, and the fantasy was to hit the messenger with the car, and then to have all of the pedestrians carrying you away in triumph.
Yeah, I mean, haha, that's really, that, I don't know, that's a really kind of dangerous thing to be throwing out
Well,
there.
it is a dangerous thing to be throwing out there, and then, so that also within, you say National Press Club, a very honored member of radio, Marvin Kalb, and
Yeah,
it could have been in the 2000s. He just did a flippant piece about Lance Armstrong wannabes holding up traffic in their skinny lycra shorts, or whatever,
they always
whatever.
mentioned the Lycra shorts. That was like,
Yeah, no, but it's but the thing was, it's like what they don't realize is like they're reinforcing racism. You know,
Yes.
people
Yeah.
being anti-bike in their car, people being frustrated, when really that same person should be offering logic and reason and go, you know what? The speed limit on this road is actually now it's 20, but in those times it was 25. But
Yeah.
the speed limit is 25, and you're frustrated that you can't go 35. And if you were to do the math on how much this bicycle is slowing you down, you'll find that they aren't really. You're going to catch that bumper in front of you.
Right.
I ride my bicycle every day. Still now, I work as a dog walker and I go between dogs, and yeah, people pass me aggressively, and I'm not even young and I'm spry. I'm just chilling, and I catch them and I pass them at the red light. Like
Yeah.
they put my life at risk and didn't get any further, any faster. It's selfish, it's illogical, it's ignorant, but to weaponize the car, oh my goodness. I mean, we have too many incidents, and Tony Kornheiser, ESPN guy, Washington, D.C., local. And I think WABA would probably step up now, but in the earlier eras when these people spoke out anti-bike, it
Yeah.
I was always saddened that WABA didn't go and protest in front of these houses. ESPN guy, like, you too many people like your opinion, too many people respect you to go out and just be doing, and it's always the same line. And people
Right.
and right now it's Tade Pogacar, no one, it'd be like, yo, Dr. J, what's up? Like, no one's referring to Dr. J anymore. No one refers to Lance Armstrong anymore. There's been multiple goats since then, and now it's Tade Pogacar. But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that,
It's funny. You mentioned Kornheiser because a quote from him was in an earlier draft of the book that I ended up kind of having to edit out just for space. But yeah, he had some line about like I forgot what it was. The potholes are so big on the streets of the city, and maybe they'll just swallow up a bike messenger, and we won't have to deal with them anymore. So, and it's too bad because I actually kind of have always liked Kornheiser, and then I read that, and I was just so disappointed reading that. So,
and that's just, well, hey, sorry about the dog. And I'm in my front yard. My dog was just he's just being a dog. People are walking by, and he's like, guarding the space. But but yeah, so that is just one of multiple anti-dog. It's comedy,
yeah,
but
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 it got to be like leaving one of his columns. Remember, he said. I think he kind of insinuated that bike messengers were behind bike thefts in the city. Bike thefts, I don't know if they still are. They used to be a big problem in DC. And he was, saying that they repaint their bikes and I remember, and so I was reading that and then he also talked about it once again, the Lycra shorts and everything. Well, IGE, who I worked for, had a dress code which was ridiculous. But we were only allowed to wear pants, so we couldn't even wear shorts. Which by the time I quit in the middle of June, that was getting to be pretty insane to be riding around on a 90-degree day, in jeans. But in any case, yeah, that was as far from the truth. And nobody had a stolen bike. I don't know where he would have, even come
well,
up
no,
with
no,
that.
no, no. I mean,
It's like,
I knew a woman who was a bike messenger, and for a while she was a bike broker.
okay,
She lived in Columbia Heights, and
yeah,
crack was king. And so she ran a legitimate bicycle repair shop.
yeah,
And so there was a mechanic who worked at the Bicycle Pro Shop in Georgetown, Marshall. And he was an amazing guy, amazing mechanic, could do wheelies like no other. And he died tragically, gun violence at the craps game. But
yeah. That era, yeah, it's
yeah,
horrible.
and so yeah, but that's the era. And so kids would come and sell her bikes, and she wouldn't ask questions.
Yeah,
She would buy and sell bikes. And so it's not that those things didn't happen, but she also ran a legitimate business, and her mechanic was one of the best in the city. So if she got this bicycle and it was rickety and broken down, she had this guy revamp it so it was fresh, and then it went out good. And so here's the reality: bicycles are expensive.
yeah, Yeah.
Most everybody on the planet is paycheck to paycheck. Bike messengers, paycheck to paycheck, even with a lower, simpler lifestyle. What is the title of your book again?
Rebels without a car.
And yeah, cars cost money. Bicycles cost
Yeah.
less money. But so it's true. Bicyclists will be opportunists. People will roll up into the park sell a stolen bike. And people, it's hard, to refuse temptation. We can't judge everybody by the same set of morals.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
and
DC, one of the things that is in the book is DC used to have, and one of their attempts to curtail bike thefts was a mandatory bike registration law. Do you remember this at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, what's insane about the current times and the way people drive in Washington D.C. And I was not a bike messenger, but as a bike messenger, I was a bike messenger long enough to get enough tickets on my bicycle that they suspended my Maryland car driver's license.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, no.
Wow.
I heard an episode where a woman went into the zoo and got pulled over and was given like a ticket for not having bells and lights on the bikes. Like, I mean,
Right.
like anti-bike, I had a lot of cops pull me over and not give me tickets because I was riding wildly. I was young and foolish. And they're like, you were in a hurry? You were in a hurry? Well, now you're going to wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I got two tickets riding on sidewalks. I remember they were only $5, but it was enough that I was making so little that when you got a $5 ticket, that was like a couple of deliveries right there. So yeah, it was not something I could really afford.
oh my God, but like I mean I took this to court. Like, I mean, it was just like because the tickets were like one time they gave me a speeding ticket and I was like, it wasn't that I was going fast. It's that you had to go that fast to catch me.
Right,
You
right,
know,
yeah,
like
to
like,
catch up with you,
and,
right, yeah.
and I said to the guy, I said, there's a baby crawling in China. We fly in a plane and we break the speed of sound to get to that baby. Is that baby crawling at the speed of sound? No.
Right.
This dude just looking at me like drop jaw, like here's your ticket. You can contest it in
Right.
court. No.
So did you win your case?
Um, I think winning the case was like, I think winning the case was no points and paying half
Okay.
and getting my license
That's no
and
points. That's good.
getting my license back. That
Right,
and you
right.
can and you consider that a win. No,
Yeah.
and no, I did not work as a bicycle messenger, but I got audited by the IRS as a bike messenger. So
Wow, wow.
I think I have enough bicycle messenger experiences, but really the gatekeepers, I don't even really care about the conversation because a lot of my time was as a college student, you,
Yeah,
you know, but I also took time off in college and worked after college. I traveled and came back. And I mean, I, and well, the funny thing is, since it is like every other summer, it's almost like a different sample,
sure.
of the time and the culture. But
Yeah.
but but so that's a story too. I went to a high school reunion last year and I regretted not bringing, I'm just using like a handheld system to do my recording. And there were probably like 6 or 7 guys there from my year and the year after who had worked as bike messengers. You know,
Oh, okay.
because
Wow.
you're in Bethesda, you're home from college, it's a summer job. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I know. I don't know if it's true. I don't think it's true anymore. But when I was in DC and did that, it was an easy job to get. And exactly like you said, no questions asked. They told you, your own business. File quarterly for your taxes. You're on your way.
so,
So
so, so the messenger industry went through a lot of different phases, and so
yeah,
like there might have been a time where it was more of a free for all, and there was a lot of work, so like in the '80s into the '90s, there were so many companies, and
yeah,
and companies had different reputations, but the couriers brought it upon themselves. There were so many couriers that were not dependable.
yeah,
So two things: a lot of people didn't work in the rain, you know, and
yeah,
a lot of people, and this is in the in the check cashing era, on payday they came in and they didn't work. They waited for their check like a dog waiting for a bone.
Uh-huh.
And they would get their check and they'd go cash their check. They wouldn't work on Friday, and
Yeah,
it's so you're dealing with a culture of imperfect workers, and then
sure.
and then you get a bunch of college kid go-getters with fresh legs. Yeah. And Sean Vega, that's what you were alluding to, is that, like that unionization, protection, all those things. There were a lot of things that they should have done, and overhiring. Some companies only hired the cream of the crop and would only take on maybe one or two if kids if they of course you're going to need it. People can go on vacation or whatever, or
Right.
take a break. But so I mean, it's interesting. So we talked about this industry and the times and whatever, and so we know that in the '80s it was 1099 independent contractor for the most part,
Yeah.
and I just wonder, was that something that was created? Like, did the businessman realize that the employee was too expensive? They had bicycle employees and didn't want to take all the responsibility of an employee?
Okay, so that's a really interesting story. So that goes all the way back to the child messenger era. And there's a bike historian, James Longhurst, who wrote about this and said, and he went into the records for this and found that there were kids always getting into accidents, and then they would sue the bike company. And what bike companies realized, is if the employees were contract employees, then they were their own business, and the bike company was no longer held responsible. And so that's when the business model of having contract employees came about. So it actually dates back to, I think, the teens or 20s. And from then on, delivery systems have been basically working on this contract model, including today. So today, really, actually, bicycle delivery, or a form of bicycle deliveries, now become once again kind of an essential worker job with food delivery. So Uber Eats and Grubhub and all of those urban delivery companies, often with people on motorized bicycles. But those sell the job, to people, saying you can be your own boss, work your own hours, you know, all those sorts of things, and make it sound very attractive that way. Um, and it's probably one of those things that people do, if sometimes they have another job and it doesn't really pay them quite enough to live in a city like DC, so they've got to pick up something else and do that, over the weekend, or in the evenings. It's also something that immigrant labor can do without, hopefully kind of staying underneath the radar, although obviously these days that's a lot more difficult with ICE. But immigrant workers were able to do that and avoid getting, on some kind of public role where they would get noticed. So, that's partly, kind of, once again, it almost resembles the late 19th, early 20th century, the Gilded Age bike messengers, because they're sort of using a very exploitable class of people, and using that particular business model. But and like, I forgot, I don't want to mention the company because I don't know it for sure, but it was an article in the New York Times that when you tipped your delivery worker, the company was keeping the tips. They got caught doing that and ended up changing. But so it's a very exploited and exploitable group that would have a hard time protesting an action like that.
Well, so with the evolution of the bicycle messenger, and there was a rapid decline, and hundreds and hundreds dropping off to the current dozen. And
Yeah.
but so there's a dozen messengers that still do probably similar to paper type work, and there's a few messengers that mix it, but most people, there's still people out there on bicycle
Yeah.
doing food. And so there's one guy, Suave, and he was a bike messenger for decades, and he has morphed and changed, and he delivers foods. And some jobs come, and they're they're so low paying, and he'll like let the scooter guy take it. And because these guys on the scooters, they'll take these jobs that are so low paying, and then if it's $1.50, there's no way that you could do enough $1.50 jobs to give you a decent hourly.
Yeah. I mean, it is, when
It's
I saw what they pay workers, it was, their delivery workers, it was really um,
it's
hard to believe.
it's unethical. I tried to do
Yeah.
it. I tried to do it on the straight up bike, and there was too much time in between deliveries, and there was too much time. The delivery, like the bike messenger, had such a quicker turnaround. The bike messengers would show up, lock up, and sometimes they would just lean lock it. They'd go in, try and get past the guard without signing in, get in the elevator, hit their button, go to their floor, send the elevator up 2 floors higher than that, hit the down button when they get out, so that when they get in, they've grabbed their thing, they're going out, the elevator's there when they get there, they're Maxwell smart, they're in the doors, they're out the doors, they're on the bike, and they're gone, and they got multiple packages at the same time. The,
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the food delivery person, you lock up your bike, you stroll in, you get in line, you finally get to ask them, the food's not ready. You wait,
Right.
you wait, you wait, and you wait. And then the weird thing is, if you're not like being a dick and asking 2 seconds, is my food ready? Is my food ready? Is my food ready? They'll just put it up without calling the name. So it's like this inefficient process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you help me in this dance? I want to dance fast.
Right.
You're going too slow. You have to understand my part of the puzzle here, you know
Yeah.
and I think that I've heard that Uber Eats is changing it such to change it so you like if you don't use it as frequently, like the algorithm is complicated. I could never figure out. I think that I never made any money, you know
And it struck me, a waiter makes money on tips. A waiter or waitress makes money on tips, but did people tip you when you did it, or were you able to collect tips, or how did that? Because if you're delivering food without being tipped, I don't,
so
for
so so
reasons
so
you're talking about, I don't see how you're gonna make any money.
it tells you the number, like pick up a Chick-fil-A going to blah blah blah, you know 450, after assumed tip or something, or whatever. And I don't know if the tip could be more or if it could less. I really didn't follow it that closely. It would have been another job to try and figure out, I need to interview people who believe that they know what the hell's going on with that. The career
Right.
people out on the bike, and how do they make money? And so I saw this guy. I was at a Andy Zalen and April Sourwine co-host this bike messenger event, and it's been going on and off for 30 years, and it's called the Rough News Time Trials, and it's a 5 mile mixed climb descent sprint loop in Rock Creek Park, that
Okay.
and barbecue. And so people come out and they do some laps. And yeah, a lot of guys show up on their e-bikes. Like this one guy was a fixed gear guy, and he rode a fixed gear like it was ballet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh and that was kind of one of the things that Andy Zale and I talked about, is that to some people the bike was, he might have ridden it for ballet. He was at work, well, why not? But did he ever ride it like that for pleasure? Was he
Right.
was he like, oh, it's Sunday, I'm gonna go mess around on my fixed gear? And to some people that was the thing, you know. But this guy, he's doing delivery, and he's on an e-bike, which makes sense. And
Sure.
and I think that like his belief is like he hangs out in one section. And I let the algorithm take me any direction it took me.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, I'll go across town for, these 2 jobs for $12 because there's more restaurants over there. But it didn't
Right.
it didn't really work. And like I always thought the app, I wish you could tell it like, well, I want to go this way. Oh, okay, well, we'll give you work, because a lot of times I'm like, well, I want to go home,
Yeah, yeah,
I live up by Tacoma Park in Northwest, and I want to go get my work down by DuPont Circle or West End. And I would try and get work, and like they'd only be offering me work taking me into like deadhead land, like Northeast where there's residential, but like I don't want to go someplace where I have to go back for free.
right. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and so like this, the smart person will only take jobs where they'll leave them jobs, and they'll come to know the business where they'll know like, oh, well, that restaurant is always slow.
yeah,
Oh, oh,
right,
look what building it's going to. Oh, that building, you have to take it to the person's door, and it's going to be, you know, 2 city block of walking a labyrinth from the, you know, from the lobby.
right, right. Yeah,
And
yeah,
and so
yeah,
so yeah, it's a riddle, and it's a sad riddle, and so that is one of the questions of like, there was a Washingtonian article and interview a few people, and the topic, and it's been a question for a long time, but like is this the end of the messenger industry, the era? Is it the end of an era?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing because you could see it as an end of an era, or it's shifting to food. Even though with the difficulties you talked about, people really rely on that now,
Yeah,
it
but no, no, no,
seems.
no, no, no. That is on a motorbike. It is not a bicycle. I'm saying bicycle delivery.
You mean bicycle, just,
Yeah,
bipedaling,
yeah, yeah.
no motor.
No
Yeah,
motor. It's not the same thing. I mean,
yeah.
we've just gone from bow hunting to the to the shooting range.
It might be the end of it in that regard.
Because
Yeah. I mean,
I
the other thing I was thinking, because I'm now for a variety of reasons, I'm probably a lot more familiar with New York City than I am with DC. And the bike lanes there, are so occupied by people delivering food on electric bikes. It's really kind of dangerous to ride a regular bicycle in the bike lanes because you're going to just kind of get overtaken by somebody on a motorized bicycle.
well,
So yeah, I could really see the actual era of a bike messenger now coming to an end.
yeah. So Andy Zalen he was in management in the delivery side of a flower company that did delivery.
Yeah.
And so it was called Urban Stems, and Urban Stems is still a company, and he still works there. But for 11 years, they had a bicycle division, and they hired, I would like to say the the creme de la creme, but some messengers are still the creme de la creme. Can be clowns too. But they hired the people that could get the job done, and they had a fleet of Omnium cargo bikes, and yeah, for 11 years, messengers delivered, heck, the message of love, flowers,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know, but so it was funny because, some of these people, I'm like, are you a bike messenger? Are you a bike messenger? You're delivering flowers, like,
Right.
like, 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 like that's the gatekeeping. And so
Yeah.
I mentioned Scrooge, and Scrooge delivers food, but on a gas powered scooter. Like, I think it goes like 300 miles an hour. And
Right.
and no, and he's built up like he's in like Death Race 2026. Like he's got like
Right.
full on like armor, like he's gonna get shot out of a cannon.
On Facebook, he's the first person I think I ever saw using a cargo bike.
So yeah, so that's part of the story. And so Scrooge, he was in the industry for a while, and he worked in the house doing stuff, whatever. I mean, he was very much a part of it, and he evolved. You had to specialize. Oh, there's a lot of companies, or a lot of workers, and so he was riding a Bullet or other types of cargo bikes at a time. He went and competed at Messenger World Championships in cargo divisions, but
Yeah.
he really worked. I mean, dude, you're gonna die when you see some of the photos. I mean, I have photos him moving, like a dozen legal boxes.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
I mean, he was the man, and this is not an e-bike. He's pushing a regular
Yeah.
bike. You,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and respect. There's no judging him for, for being, you know, on the gas powered vehicle. I mean,
Sure.
it's work, and a lot of people, you say a rebel without a car, but that's the evolution. So the evolution of the messenger is you work as a messenger, you climb the ladder within that messenger company, and then you realize you got to start your own messenger company.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
and
I can see
so
that.
yeah, and so a lot of these people became messengers, and then they found that, especially in a post-COVID world, all your work is in car. You know,
Yeah.
and that's and so they became rebels in cars, and then like
Interesting.
the last holdouts would be like, you're not a messenger, you're not a mess like like hold on, Peter Pan, not everybody lives in Neverland, like, yeah,
Yeah.
people got to work. It's in the end, it's a job,
Right.
and I mean, I always thought it would have been interesting to back in the day when people were doing 40 or 50 runs a day, like, to time them, how much time is on the bike, how much is on the time, like, between bike and elevators, and how much time is in elevators. I'm like, I bet you elevators, you could be riding elevators as much as riding a bike, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
like, it's like, I mean, in the time you're waiting for it, you're like, oh, I just sprinted across town, and now it's 3 minutes of elevators going up and 3 minutes of elevators going down.
And when you were a rookie like me, you didn't get a walkie-talkie, so you had to, like if you went to a law firm, you had to use their phone, and there was always a line to use a phone. So that took up even more time. Just waiting for someone else to get off the call, and then you would finally get your turn.
No, and so they had these courtesy phones, and it was funny. And so there were these courtesy phones, and yeah, it was kind of like a given that you were allowed to use them, but you had to be like totally subservient to the
Yes.
receptionist, and like
Yes.
you'd like do a curtsy and be like, "Madame, would it be to your liking that I use your
Right.
phone only to call my company?" And
Right.
and
Right.
and like and so I said I was posting all these photos. I posted a photo and someone named them, but I won't name them. But I can remember just hearing on the radio that this guy had like beat a receptionist with the phone. And I
Is
was like,
that right?
and like her phone while she was on it. And I was like, I bet you she refused him to use the courtesy phone.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Yeah.
and like, cause it's within sight, but sometimes the courtesy phone, like in that case, like it's a conference room, and maybe they're about to use the conference room.
Right.
Or
Right.
or maybe that guy used the phone one time and was in there for like 45 minutes,
Right. Right.
like,
Yeah.
like they talk about unionizing the couriers and stuff like that. I mean, like,
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
these guys are indefensible,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good that you take a good balanced kind of approach to things, and that's where, like with Bob Levy, I won't say that, people never would have a grievance against bike messengers, right?
I'll,
But
I'll tell you, I'll tell you, the bike messenger is a lot like the food delivery people, and hear New Yorkers talk about it all the time. You see,
yeah.
videos about it. It's just like the '80s bike messengers, and the '80s bike messengers approach fast and smooth, but the people didn't expect them because they weren't looking for them. So even if the bicycle was in the right of way, not on the sidewalk like
Right.
adults ride on the street, but like people stepping out in front of it and almost getting hit. It's like you didn't look both ways. And so
Right. And
so
you
so
weren't looking for a bike.
yeah, and so these people step out into the bike lane and they almost get flattened by one of these, New York food delivery guys.
Right.
And and then they're like, oh, the food delivery guy, well, it's true they almost hit you, but they had the green light, they were going the right way, and they really weren't going that fast. you know
Right.
I have found, I'm not a New Yorker, but in my trips to New York, I found that the food delivery people, and it's been a bit, so it could be a new culture now, but I felt that they rode within the infrastructure and obeyed the law and were respectful. You know, and nobody wants to hit anybody. And that's another thing. Even the wildest messenger doesn't want to
They don't
hit,
want to
hit.
hit somebody.
Yeah, yeah,
No, it's
yeah,
going to
yeah.
hurt them. They're going to get hurt as
Yeah,
much as anybody else.
exactly. So that's like, that's
Yeah.
why, yeah, this demonizing them as if like they're reckless, you know. Like my brother, one time someone was at a party and they talk about cyclists running through red lights. And my brother, you know, he's a PhD, he's not a bike courier, but he's a athlete and a good cyclist. And he's like, run through, you know, blow through red lights. He's like, I don't blow through green lights. You know,
Right.
it's like a mathematical equation of like, what is here, what is there, how fast is this? You know, it's like Frogger on steroids.
And one thing, Bega and David were part of the, sort of movement to try to reform bike messengering back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they pointed out, just with the contractor model and the demands that the companies would put onto the messengers, they would say, pick up these deposit slips and get it to the bank, 15 blocks away, and you have 5 minutes because the bank closes. Well, of course they're going to ride recklessly to get that delivery done. And they might guarantee, you're going to get your package delivered in 30 minutes or whatever it might be. And it would be really almost an impossible task without breaking laws to do that. So one of the things they were proposing to the city council was to, have some regulations about that. What companies could promise their customers and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's more of a nicety, you know, like it's almost like, but it's true. You know, I often say, you know, when I see cars parked in the bike lane or whatever, I often say that a messenger never thought that because it was their job that they could run the red light. They knew that it was against the law and they could get in trouble for it.
Right, right. And to the extent that they would ride somewhat recklessly, that's where Levy,
Well,
if he had a problem with that, it's like, well, look at what the way that the business model is set up.
no,
That
no, no. I
is
think,
sort
I
of
think, I
encouraged
think, I
that
think,
movement.
I think it's an interesting thing is the bicyclist. The word reckless it's the exact opposite because the movement of the bicycle from this space to that space is to put themselves out of danger.
Yeah,
I am here and now I must be there. Oh, it's my space and I have my right to the space, but I can see ahead that someone's going to take the space. So now I must move elsewhere. And so it seems like it's, you know, dodging and dashing for some sort of like, you know, erotic pleasure when it's like it's strictly just to be fast, efficient, and where what is to believe is the most safe way through.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, exactly. So, uh, it was kind of a, an unfair way of characterizing things, and I thought it was really interesting that there was a movement to kind of try to, Bega and David and I think Andy and some of the other people were trying to kind of change things around. I do want to give one more shout out to somebody who I didn't interview, but who I thought just was an amazing sort of source, is Rebecca Riley, in her book Nerves of Steel, which I use quite a bit. And she did the thing where she went to multiple cities and worked as a bike messenger, and has a great chapter on DC with all the people that you're mentioning here. And I think she wrote that like in maybe 2000, something like that. But I'm sure you're familiar with that book. But
Okay, so yeah, so Rebecca Riley hosts a bike messenger centric podcast called "What's
right,
My 20," and
what's my 20?
yeah,
Right.
"What's My 20" is available anywhere that you get podcasts. I would say check it out. Yeah, so many of the names that we have mentioned, you know, and when we're talking about certain moments, you know, it goes into depth about, you know, she interviews people from the, you know, the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and yeah, she gets a lot of great stories in different cities, you know, like it's hilarious. And yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of it is about the brotherhood, you know, it's
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, she's just really, and it's funny because she just self-published that book and so forth. But when I've talked to bike messengers in DC, they all have read it. You know, everybody has read it. It's really kind of like it reminds me of like you know, version of On the Road or something. You know, she really made an impact with that.
Yes, I'm sure that she'd love to hear that as a review from
Yeah.
from another author. And
Yeah.
and yeah, so yeah, definitely, you should check out some of, you could even just search it and try and go to, episodes that interviewed people that you're familiar with.
Yeah, no, I've heard a few episodes of it, and it's great. Yeah.
All right, so okay, so you've got this book, A Rebel Without a Car. So, are, and we mentioned that, Rebecca self-published her book, Nerves of Steel. And so, do you have a publisher? Do you have a publishing date? What's going on with this?
Yeah, so the publisher is Georgetown University Press, and it's gonna be coming out. I just finished the proofs and sent them in. In fact, moments before we talked, I realized I misspelled your name on a page, so I corrected that and sent that in. So it was with an S and not a Z. So
No,
um,
it's with a Z.
yes, it's with a Z, so I changed it to the Z. So hopefully they caught that. But anyway, those are the proofs. They're sent in, and it just needs to be indexed. And then I think it's the release date is uh, in the spring of 27.
Well, that's fantastic. Are you excited?
I am super excited. I've worked on this book for I think I started in 2010, so it's been a long haul. And where I teach, it's a really heavy teaching schedule, and then I've, published some other things in the meantime. So I kind of had to leave this book and come back to it, and leave it and come back to it. I've written, I think, 4 drafts of it. So it's, to finally see it out in print is just really exciting. And I'm hoping that, like you said, I know there's a lot of gatekeeping with the messenger community. I want people to consider this as my kind of love letter and gift to the messenger community. I'm not making any claims myself, as I said, about being a messenger, but I thought, my gift is I could go back and look at the kind of history that we've talked about that might not be as common knowledge.
Yeah, I think as we move further on, I think that people are starting to have like a little more respect and understanding. So someone may not have liked to have their picture taken, but they sure like to see a photo of themselves,
Sure.
you know? And and
Yeah, yeah,
and and so one of the things, I took the photos for 20 years and there were all these guys and not everyone likes their photo, not to stereotype, but it's it's not uncommon for black men to not want can want to be private. Don't take my picture. Why are you taking my picture? You know?
sure.
And so and DC as a whole, like I said, I took photos probably for 2 years before Scrooge gave me a response of yes, like, oh, you can take my picture now. And so I like some people would give a rule, like they'd say, you take my photo, but you could never take a photo of me sitting down. And so I could only take action shots of them, and
Yeah,
and so I always tried, I was never trying to capture anybody in a unflattering light. I want them to look cool. I want a cool photo. But I think, like this guy, Lawrence Colbert, that I communicate with on Facebook, I think that he feels the feeling that I think a lot of the guys feel like, my photos are that I took or anyone taking a photo, it kind of justifies their life,
sure.
like
Yeah,
like like I'm saying what you were doing was cool, respect, check this out. I mean, it's like the Pony Express. We don't know if it's done, but it's basically done. The Pony Express was only like 7 or 9 years, and like the bicycle messenger thing is, as we're speaking, may have only been from 1971 to 2024, or
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's a point where like, I mean, like the messenger culture might be, it's a little bit of a mixture of family reunion and cosplay, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's
But there is
that's
there is the potential, just as Urban Stems showed that you can do bicycle delivery. people would roll out on these Omnium cargo bikes with these custom made bags, and they could have 30 bigger than a shoebox bouquet of flowers to be delivered around the city, and there was enough work that they could do a logical 4 hour loop or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think of things like, we all, like, if you go to the doctor and you get a prescription, you take your prescription, you go to the CVS, and in most cases, I ride my bike, but most people, you drive to the CVS, you park at the CVS, like, you either have to wait there or you go somewhere else. And if you go somewhere else, it's driving and parking. You go back, is it ready? You get it, and then you drive home. What if they just streamlined all of it, central delivery, and cargo bikes go out, but you could carry 30 or 40 prescription drop-offs.
Yeah. And in an urban environment, that would be really convenient for a lot of people, I
Yeah,
would think.
you could reduce. So I think it's egregious. I think it's just the fact that, like, because it's an Amazon delivery, it can double park.
Yeah.
FedEx downtown, they double park and then they get back in and they drive halfway up the block and double park again. You know, and not that I would like, every sidewalk to be filled with these delivery bikes, but I think it would be, I think the cars would like it better. I think, I just don't think I don't think there's a justification for the traffic that's created by car and truck delivery culture. I think that it's egregious. I think there's a failure. I think they're professionals, and that it's a solvable problem.
Yeah. I totally agree with you about that. Yeah.
But I think people are fine with the problems. I
Yeah.
think that
Right.
I mean, we had a fuel crisis, and the fuel crisis didn't go away, and we went from the Honda Civic that was the size of a size 13 shoe to SUVs with mom driving around midday because the kids don't go to hockey till 3:30.
Right. And
Like,
the fuel crisis, that was another reason why the bicycle boom came about, early 70s too. So yeah, there was a fuel crisis back then, and that was a big part of it.
and just as we have the e-bike, and what is an e-bike, back then they had the moped.
They had the moped, right, right.
And so, it's, this country's been in civil war. I grew up in Maryland, and we don't like Virginia. you know cars don't like bicyclists. I I just think, yeah, people suck.
Yeah.
You know,
But
messengers in their heyday didn't do anything to make them more likable. In the 80s in DuPont Circle, so there's these two guys, Suicide and Ozone, and they take credit for, like, kind of like bonding the messenger culture. I don't know if it's true or not. This is the way they script it. And
yeah,
they're both amazing guys. And I've listened to their podcasts. I've talked to Ozone on my podcast, but his interview on Rebecca's podcast is amazing. His story is amazing. But I just think it's kind of interesting that they talk about, like, starting this bike messenger culture, or they might have, but whatever.
yeah,
Because I think things are more organic there. Like, Discord Records didn't start DC punk rock.
right,
Like,
right. Yeah.
I get it that you did something that was dynamic, but shit was already going around, right
Yeah.
alongside of you.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about 1986. The movie Quicksilver came out in 1986. So you can't tell me
Right.
that there isn't already culture, courier culture communities,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
yeah. But that's a lost tangent. But so yeah, I totally lost. That was supposed to come around to a different point.
Well, I've taken up a lot of your time tonight, but I'm happy to talk more. But
I think this is good. I think this will be good. We can cut it off right now. And why don't I just talk to you socially for 2 minutes after this? This has been a great interview. So this is John Bloom, and he has written this book. It's called "The Rebel Without a Car," and
yeah, Rebels Without a Car.
it's about DC bike. No, it's about bike messengers in DC, but historical book that starts in what could be, people often question, when did bike messengers start? Well, so you're saying, the turn of the century, so we have this guy Kingfish, and when he walked the earth, he claimed that he was the first bike messenger. And I was like, oh, there were kids
No,
delivering. Yeah.
right. You can correct him on that. Yeah.
Well, he has since passed, but he's a legend. And
Yeah.
but yeah, he was, just as these people thought that, the light, because the light was shining on them, they thought the light never shined on anyone else before.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, and one of the things that these people talk about is them like innovating this idea of being journeyman couriers, and it's something that Rebecca did, and she was
Yes.
friends with these people. She intentionally, and a lot of people did that, and it's true, a lot of people did that. But I think a lot of people did that. It's hard to say you were the first at anything. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
LL Cool J has been quoted as saying that he created the fashion of rolling up the pant leg. But no, New York bike messengers were
Yeah.
rolling up the pant leg because they rode in jeans, and
Yeah.
hip hop fashion. Some people who were messengers showed up looking like that, and people borrowed it from that. Like, and maybe LL borrowed it from that, but he still can't take credit for something that
Right.
already
Exactly.
existed and was cool. And
Yeah.
I mean, LA Cool J's the man. I mean, he was the man when he was 15, and he's still the man now.
Right.
He was one of the, his, 15 handing a tape over to Rick Rubin, or whatever, that's an amazing story. Like,
Yeah.
NYU college student producing like whatever,
Yeah.
what an amazing synergy. And we talk about bike messengers, and so, I don't know, do you did you do a chapter on, let's say, musicians? Were there any famous musicians that were
Just
weaved into
briefly
this?
mentioned, I forget his first name. Anyway, his dad was the senator, and he was in a punk band called Marginal Men, and he was a bike messenger. And he was part of the zine Mobile City. So there were a couple of zines that I mentioned, but Mobile City is probably the one I go into the most. And
Well,
he
what's interesting is, so I don't know. So Mobile City might have been an art magazine. I think it was an art magazine that collected, art, poetry, songs, photography,
exactly.
and
Yep.
drawings from messengers. So that may not be. Now, Andy Zalen had a zine called Rush. And so, yeah, it was. So James Kearns, along with Stevie Gibson, had Mobile City. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you do touch on something. And so yeah, it's Kenny Inua, and his father was a senator.
Kenny. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
his father was a Hawaiian senator, but he's also a war hero who lost his arm. But
He's lost
and
his arm, right?
yeah, but the story of that moment is like just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, and so Kenny was not only a musician, but he was also a skateboarder.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
did you manage to understand? Did you touch in on that?
I did not. I didn't know he was a skateboarder.
Well, but not just that he was a skateboarder, but there was a period where skateboarding and ramp skating, there was a ramp in Northern Virginia called Cedar Crest. And people from all over the nation and all over the world, Billy Smith and his brother Steve Smith, I assume they came here to skate. They were skaters, and they were British. But people came, and came to skate, but they needed to work. And so much of people finding a job is word of mouth, and
Sure.
and so
Yeah.
and so one person does it, and they tell their friends, and so on and so on. Just like Farrah Fawcett and her shampoo commercial, Fabergé.
Right. Right.
And so Apple Courier, there could have been a dozen kids, Memento Mori Lee from Texas, and there were a whole group of Texans, Angry Andy, and these
Yeah.
and these people skateboarded on a steel ramp, and they rode with like the style and grace. It's sort of like Michael Jordan. Like they were like,
Yeah.
you know, there were great basketball players, but there were only Michael Jordan. These guys were all great skateboarders, and they were contemporaries of Tony Hawk, but there was only one Tony Hawk.
Right, right.
And so
But
just as the skateboarders were low life scum to society, so were these skateboarders. When the irony of these skateboarders is their athletic achievement was Olympic.
yeah, and literally, I mean, it's now become like with X Games and that kind of thing. It's really become a respected sport in a way that it wasn't back then. You know, it was like in empty swimming pools, and then ramps and daredevil moves down stairways and that kind of thing. There's a lot of people that have written about skateboarders, but the overlap between skateboarders and bike messengers isn't something that I really went into at all. So that's all really fascinating stuff to hear.
Which means there's more for your book, but really,
The other thing too, and I always say is, I never have written anything that I believe was the last word on anything. And so I always hope that what I write starts a dialogue and is like a spark and gets other people to write things that are more insightful and better and expand the pool of knowledge. So
yeah,
you
everyone who climbs Everest gets to write a book about it.
right.
You're not like Krakauer can go, no, you can't write a book about Everest.
Right.
And Rebecca has a great feeling about that, and her podcast. She was welcoming
Yeah.
to me and my podcast, and she's welcoming to other authors, and yeah, and I think that's the truth. And there's more stories to tell, and there's more perspectives,
Yeah.
and that's the thing about, like, so these two guys, Suicide and Ozone, their story is their perspective,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
but the reality is, in those moments, I heard their names. It was like Stockton to Malone. Like, you would not say Suicide without saying Ozone. Like, they
Yeah.
were, and it was an interesting time. It was a pre-internet time. It was analog time, and folklore went that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just as you knew about, like, what skinhead to avoid because they were a tough guy. You know these, like, a sentence or two about everybody.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is really true, and it makes it uh, really kind of, I think, important to recover all of these stories too, because they're gone, right? It's not like they're recorded digitally somewhere and on a hard drive. They're just gone if we don't collect them now.
Yeah, this guy, I think his name was Chauncey Boyers, but I only knew him as Batman. And I just think, I mean, I think it was probably wild.
Yeah,
I, I
yeah,
think, I think, and I don't want to, I don't want to say this because I don't know, but in the '80s, I mean, crack cocaine, the it was more than just the hood.
yeah,
And
it-
so messengers, and messengers, there was in the '80s, a lot of messengers did acid, but not to hallucinate, and some of them may have never hallucinated, but they were microdosing for the energy and the sharpness to flow and rip through traffic with, like,
yeah,
precision. And so Jim Rapp would sell his Mexican dirt weed and then sheets of acid. And then, in the times things change, but, like, I mean, Messenger is not uncommon. Their water bottle, if their water bottle is clear, you can see it's 10 a.m. and there's foamy beer in their water bottle. And, and crack cocaine, no doubt,
yeah,
and there was a messenger who went by the name Go-Go Gadget, and he saw himself as, like, a role model to the kids. And he dressed up in, like, I don't know if it was a spray painted lacrosse helmet or what, but full on, like, pads and stuff, and had stuff on his bike. And I mean, it was like some sort of cosplay for the superhero that he was.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what is the story there? Is that is that mental illness or, I don't know.
Right, right. I mean, one thing that, like after I left DC, because I ended up I was planning to go to graduate school at GW, and then I ended up going instead to University of Minnesota. So I moved to Minneapolis, and that would have been, at the end of that summer, 1985. And really almost immediately after that's when crack came in, and like where I used to ride up to the IGE offices on 14th Street, I don't think I wouldn't have been able to do that after that because it became really a war zone. And that's what people around the country knew about life in DC. They thought it was just a war zone. And so much so that that's persisted so much that when I take students to DC on field trips to go to, I'll take them to the U Street corridor and see the outdoor civil rights exhibits, and we'll eat lunch at, Ben's Chili Bowl and go to the museums. And a lot of students will say, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm really feeling safe going to Washington." And it's like, that they've been hearing stories from their parents. They live in central Pennsylvania, and they think, that's a really dangerous place to go. And I hope that, in a book like this, you get a sense of DC life and culture that's not just about the violence and not just about the drug use and that sort of thing, but it's, also about people's lives um, and, a vibrancy to this. I always found DC to be a really exciting place. Um, and I just kind of want to convey that too.
Yeah, I think that, I interviewed this guy who goes by the name Mohawk, and he wrote as a messenger for decades and then did pedicab. And he told me in conversation this bit about cowboys and pirates, and then I was like, oh, we got to record this. And then he didn't retell it. But, there's this the messengers were very colorful. And
Yeah,
I just think that like
exactly. Yeah.
pirates, cowboys, like, I mean, all of these people probably came from a different family dynamic or outsider, and then they all joined the group together, and it just, there has to be a place for these square pegs to go in society.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's exactly right. And that's kind of what you say in that documentary, by the way. And that I just really appreciate that sentiment.
yeah, extroverts can, I'd probably have to watch it because I have no idea what I said. That's
Yeah, you say
unscripted.
that I have it quoted here somewhere. I can
No, no,
find it, but
I'll look it up, and I
yeah,
think
yeah,
and people should share it. And people
yeah,
should see that, and because that is that is also a time, and the messengers who are interviewed in that moment, have gone on. Some have gone on to do other things, but one of the people in there, Bruce, and I consider him a good friend, and he's still out there, but he is one of the people who had. He might do some bike work in the morning. He might do like mail pickup and drop off, but really, like, it might just be to like stretch his legs on the bike.
yeah,
He's primarily in. His clients are, have him in the car. But does that mean he's not a legend? Does he get revoked? I mean, I think that maybe we have to write off on the timeline of how many years he was a bike messenger for,
yeah.
but the fact that he's no longer on the bike doesn't, we don't like erase him and be like, you sold out, you're in a cage.
Well, and the key thing is he's part of a community and was integral to it, and that's what I have found beautiful about it too. So, you know, uh,
And so that's one of the things that's interesting is these two messengers, suicide and ozone, they try and say that they're like the Garden of Eden. They are
yeah,
they are the genesis
right,
of courier culture. And I say every work culture has its culture. Coal miners all go to the same bar. Now, the truth is, this guy threw a barbecue, a Father's Day barbecue for 30 years, like I said, their names echoed, but I think it's hard to say that there wasn't courier culture before.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah,
and
yeah,
the amazing thing about, messengers in their prime, like DuPont Circle, like, it's you have these tribes, and like that's it's probably a bigger tribe, and there's unions and intersections, but every park in the city could have, there were guys at Franklin that didn't give two shits about the DuPont people, or
sure,
what we're
yeah,
going,
yeah,
and they were just their crew. They're 6 or 8 guys, and like I said, in my photo project, I've been sending out all these photos of nothing, but I knew didn't delete them because I knew that photos of nothing are photos of something. And
yeah,
these messengers, I never knew their name. I never got, it's sort of, and I'd gone through a period of like, the street photography is weird. Like, like, you know, as a bike messenger, I carried a camera with me, and I tried to document not bike messengers, but the DC homeless population.
uh-huh, sure,
And,
yeah, yeah,
there were, in that moment, it was like, it's like there was this one guy, and he looked like Snuffleupagus. He was wearing like this massive creation of like strips of cloth, like ties, that were like this billowing thing. But I could be in the shadows, and I didn't have a good lens, but I could be in the shadows, and I could be trying to stalk him, and he knew. And since I
yeah.
was on a bike, I think he came to recognize me. And it was not like I'm competitive, and I was young, and it probably wasn't cool. Like, I would like, maybe, well, he's going, like, it's like Chase, like I'm going that way too. But I never really could get the shot, whatever. And that was maybe uncool of mine, but I did take a lot of photos of homeless people. And this one guy, he's like, I'm FBI, I'm undercover, get away. And I'm like, well, then I'm definitely taking your photo, like, but to me, I feel like, I wanted to be, respectful, but you've given up your right to privacy by coming out into public.
Yeah,
Like you're in my world. Like,
yeah,
if you're a street performer and I take your picture, I don't have, there is no contract. I understand what the contract is. If I was listening to your music and I liked it, but no, you're actually standing where I want to take a photo. So
yeah.
I'll frame you in it. I would prefer the photo without you in it. And now the way you're coming at me, I'd prefer this planet without you in it. But like, to say that I owe you money because I took your photo, like, yeah, that might work with some tourists, but that doesn't work with me.
Right. Well, Joel, I don't want to take up too much more of your time here.
Yeah. I just wanted to hit the, I thought that, because I got real lucky on, on the various journalists in the area, and on a number of the topics. I thought that I hit these chapters, like I was able to bring them out, and I thought that maybe music, and yeah, and Marginal Man is an amazing band. Anybody who has, I mean, I would research the history of Senator Enua from Hawaii, and if
Yeah.
and
Well,
and
I remember from the Watergate hearings, believe it or not. I remember when he was on that, which shows how old I am.
yeah, but Identity by Marginal Man, that's my era.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe senior in high school when that came out. I was going to punk shows in Washington D.C. And I mean, that was a mixing of tribes, and there was a lot of messenger overlap with that skateboarding messenger and
Yeah, yeah,
DC
I'm
punk rock.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, maybe that's a book for another author.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I hope this opens up more ideas. So that's great.
Yes. All right, have a good night.
You too. Thank you very much, Joel.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we're almost at 2 hours, so
Okay.
too long for anybody.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. It
All
was a
right,
real pleasure.
all right. That's it. That's a wrap. The end.
Okay,
Good night.
great.
Bye.